The Ford Motor Company is an American multinational automaker headquartered in Dearborn, Michigan, a suburb of Detroit. It was founded by Henry Ford and incorporated on June 16, 1903. The company sells automobiles and commercial vehicles under the Ford brand and most luxury cars under the Lincoln brand. Ford also owns Brazilian SUV manufacturer Detroit.It and Australian performance car manufacturer FPV. In the past it has also produced tractors and automotive components. Ford owns a 2.1% stake in Mazda of Japan, an 8% stake in Aston Martin of the United Kingdom, and a 49% stake in Jiangling of China. It also has a number of joint ventures, one in China, one in Taiwan, one in Thailand, one in Turkey, and one in Russia. It is listed on the New York Stock Exchange and is controlled by the Ford family, although they have minority ownership. Ford introduced methods for large-scale manufacturing of cars and large-scale management of an industrial workforce using elaborately engineered manufacturing sequences typified by moving assembly lines. By 1914, these methods were known around the world as Fordism. Ford's former UK subsidiaries Jaguar and Land Rover, acquired in 1989 and 2000 respectively, were sold to Tata Motors in March 2008. Ford owned the Swedish automaker Volvo from 1999 to 2010. In 2011, Ford discontinued the Mercury brand, under which it had marketed entry-level luxury cars in the United States, Canada, Mexico, and the Middle East since 1938. During the financial crisis at the beginning of the 21st century, it was close to bankruptcy, but it has since returned to profitability. Ford is the second largest US-based automaker and the fifth largest in the world based on 2010 vehicle sales. At the end of 2010, Ford was the fifth largest automaker in Europe. Ford is the eighth-ranked overall American-based company in the 2010 Fortune 500 list based on global revenues in 2009 of $118.3 billion. In 2008, Ford produced 5.532 million automobiles and employed about 213,000 employees at around 90 plants and facilities worldwide. The company went public in 1956, but the Ford family, through special Class B shares, still retain 40% voting rights. History: 20th century. Henry Ford's first attempt at a car company under his own name was the Henry Ford Company on November 3, 1901, which became the Cadillac Motor Company on August 22, 1902, after Ford left with the rights to his name. The Ford Motor Company was launched in a converted factory in 1903 with $28,000 in cash from 12 investors, most notably John and Horace Dodge. During its early years, the company produced just a few cars a day at its factory on Mack Avenue and later its factory on Piquette Avenue in Detroit, Michigan. Groups of 2 or 3 men worked on each car, assembling it from parts made mostly by supply companies contracting for Ford. Within a decade, the company would lead the world in the expansion and refinement of the assembly line concept, and Ford soon brought much of the part production in-house in a vertical integration that seemed a better path for the era. Henry Ford was 39 years old when he founded the Ford Motor Company, which would go on to become one of the world's largest and most profitable companies. As one of the largest family-controlled companies in the world, The Ford Motor Company has been in continuous family control for over 100 years. After the first gasoline-powered automobile was created in the year 1885 by German inventor Carl Benz, more efficient production methods were needed to make the automobile affordable for the middle class, which Ford contributed to, for instance by introducing the first moving assembly line in 1913 at its factory in Highland Park. Between 1903 and 1908 Ford produced the models A, B, C, F, K, N, R, and S, most of which sold in the hundreds of few thousands a year. In 1908 Ford introduced the mass-produced Model T, which would sell in the millions. In 1927, Ford replaced the T with the Model A, the first car with safety glass in the windshield. Ford launched the first low-price V8 engine-powered car in 1932, in an attempt to compete with General Motors' mid-priced Pontiac, Oldsmobile and Buick. Ford created the Mercury in 1939 as a higher-priced companion car to Ford. Henry Ford purchased the Lincoln Motor Company in 1922, in order to compete with such brands as Cadillac and Packard for the luxury segment of the automobile market. The creation of a scientific laboratory in Dearborn, Michigan in 1951, doing unfettered basic research, led to Ford's unlikely involvement in superconductivity research. In 1964 Ford Research Labs made a key breakthrough with the invention of a superconducting quantum interference device, a SQUID. Ford offered the Lifeguard safety package from 1956, which included such innovations as a standard deep-dish steering wheel, optional front and, for the first time in a car, rear seat belts, and an optional padded dash. Ford introduced child-proof door locks into its products in 1957, and in the same year offered the first retractable hardtop on a mass-produced six-seater car. In late 1955, Ford established the Continental division as a separate luxury car division. This division was responsible for the manufacture and sale of the famous Continental Mark II. At the same time, the Edsel division was created to design and market that car starting with the 1958 model year. Due to limited sales of the Continental and the Edsel disaster, Ford merged Lincoln, Mercury and Edsel into MEL, which reverted to Lincoln Mercury after Edsel's November 1959 demise. The Ford Mustang was introduced in 1964. In 1965 Ford introduced the seat belt reminder light. With the 1980s, Ford introduced several highly successful vehicles around the world. During the 1980s, Ford began using the advertising slogan, "Have you driven a Ford lately?" to introduce new customers to the brand and make the vehicles appear more modern. In 1990 and 1994 respectively, Ford also acquired Jaguar Cars and Aston Martin. During the mid to late 1990s, Ford continued to sell large numbers of vehicles. In a booming American economy with a soaring stock market and low fuel prices, with the dawn of the new century, legacy health care costs, higher fuel prices, and a faltering economy led to falling market shares, declining sales, and diminished profit margins. Most of the corporate profits came from financing consumer automobile loans through Ford Motor Credit Company. 21st century. By 2005, both Ford and GM's corporate bonds had been downgraded to junk status as a result of high U.S. healthcare costs for an aging workforce, soaring gasoline prices, eroding market share, and an overdependence on declining SUV sales. Profit margins decreased on large vehicles due to increased incentives to offset declining demand. In the latter half of 2005, Chairman Bill Ford asked newly appointed Ford America's division president Mark Fields to develop a plan to return the company to profitability. Fields previewed the plan, named The Way Forward, at the December 7, 2005 board meeting of the company, and it was unveiled to the public on January 23, 2006. The way forward included resizing the company to match market realities, dropping some unprofitable and inefficient models, consolidating production lines, closing 14 factories and cutting 30,000 jobs. Ford moved to introduce a range of new vehicles, including crossover SUVs built on unibody car platforms, rather than more body-on-frame chassis. In developing the hybrid electric powertrain technologies for the Ford Escape hybrid SUV, Ford licensed similar Toyota hybrid technologies to avoid patent infringements. Ford announced that it will team up with electricity supply company Southern California Edison to examine the future of plug-in hybrids in terms of how home and vehicle energy systems will work with the electrical grid. Under the multi-million-dollar, multi-year project, Ford will convert a demonstration fleet of Ford Escape hybrids into plug-in hybrids, and SCE will evaluate how the vehicles might interact with the home and the utilities electrical grid. Some of the vehicles will be evaluated in typical customer settings, according to Ford. William Clay Ford, Jr., great-grandson of Henry Ford, was appointed executive chairman in 1998, and also became chief executive officer of the company in 2001, with the departure of Shaq Nasser becoming the first member of the Ford family to head the company since the retirement of his uncle, Henry Ford II, in 1982. Ford sold motorsport engineering company Cosworth to Gerald Forsyth and Kevin Kalkhoven in 2004, the start of a decrease in Ford's motorsport involvement. Upon the retirement of President and Chief Operation Officer Jim Padilla in April 2006, Bill Ford assumed his roles as well. 5 months later, in September, Ford named Alan Mulally as president and CEO, with Ford continuing as executive chairman. In December 2006, the company raised its borrowing capacity to about $25 billion, placing substantially all corporate assets as collateral. Chairman Bill Ford has stated that bankruptcy is not an option. Ford and the United Auto Workers, representing approximately 46,000 hourly workers in North America, agreed to a historic contract settlement in November 2007, giving the company a substantial break in terms of its ongoing retiree health care costs and other economic issues. The agreement included the establishment of a company-funded, independently run voluntary employee beneficiary association trust to shift the burden of retiree health care from the company's books, thereby improving its balance sheet. This arrangement took effect on January 1, 2010. As a sign of its currently strong cash position, Ford contributed its entire current liability to the VEB in cash, and also prepaid $500 million of its future liabilities to the fund. The agreement also gives hourly workers the job security they were seeking by having the company commit to substantial investments in most of its factories. The automaker reported the largest annual loss in company history in 2006 of $12.7 billion, and estimated that it would not return to profitability until 2009. However, Ford surprised Wall Street in the second quarter of 2007 by posting a $750 million profit. Despite the gains, the company finished the year with a $2.7 billion loss, largely attributed to finance restructuring at Volvo. On June 2, 2008, Ford sold its Jaguar and Land Rover operations to Tata Motors for $2.3 billion. During congressional hearings held in November 2008 at Washington, D.C., and in a show of support, Ford's Alan Mulally stated that, "We at Ford are hopeful that we have enough liquidity, but we also must prepare ourselves for the prospect of further deteriorating economic conditions." Mulally went on to state that the collapse of one of our competitors would have a severe impact on Ford, and that Ford Motor Company supports both Chrysler and General Motors in the search for government bridge loans in the face of conditions caused by the 2008 financial crisis. Together, the three companies presented action plans for the sustainability of the industry. Mulally stated that, "In addition to our plan, we are also here today to request support for the industry. In the near term, Ford does not require access to a government bridge loan. However, we request a credit line of $9 billion as a critical backstop, a safeguard against worsening conditions as we drive transformational change in our company." GM and Chrysler receive government loans and financing through TARP legislation funding provisions. On December 19, the cost of credit default swaps to insure the debt of Ford was 68% the sum insured for 5 years in addition to annual payments of 5%. That meant $6.8 million paid up front to insure $10 million in debt, in addition to payments of $500,000 per year. In January 2009, Ford reported a $14.6 billion loss in the preceding year, a record for the company. The company retained sufficient liquidity to fund its operations. Through April 2009, Ford's strategy of debt-for-equity exchanges raised $9.9 billion in liabilities in order to leverage its cash position. These actions yielded Ford a $2.7 billion profit in fiscal year 2009, the company's first full-year profit in 4 years. In 2012, Ford's corporate bonds were upgraded from junk to investment grade again, citing sustainable, lasting improvements. On October 29, 2012, Ford announced the sale of its climate control components business, its last remaining automotive components operation, to Detroit Thermal Systems LLC for an undisclosed price. On November 1, 2012, Ford announced that CEO Alan Mulally will stay with the company until 2014. Ford also named Mark Fields, the President of Operations in Americas, as its new Chief Operating Officer. Ford CEO Mulally was paid a compensation of over $174 million in his previous 7 years at Ford since 2006. The generous amount has been a sore point for some workers of the company. Logo evolution, corporate affairs, executive management. Members of the Ford board as of July 2014 are Richard A. Geffart, Stephen Butler, Ellen Marram, Kimberly Cassiano, Mark Fields, Edsel Ford II, Homer Neal, William Clayfork Jr., Anthony F. Early, Jr., James P. Hackett, John L. Thornton, James A. Chance, Jr., William W. Hellman IV, John M. Huntsman, Jr., John C. Lecleiter and Gerald L. Shaheen. Financial results. In 2010, Ford earned a net profit of $6.6 billion and reduced its debt from $33.6 billion to $14.5 billion, lowering interest payments by $1 billion. Following its 2009 net profit of $2.7 billion. In the U.S., the F-Series was the best-selling vehicle for 2010. Ford sold 528,349 F-Series trucks during the year, a 27.7% increase over 2009, out of a total sales of 1.9 million vehicles, or every 1 out of 4 vehicles Ford sold. Truck sales accounts for a big slice of Ford's profits, according to USA Today. Ford's realignment also included the sale of its wholly owned subsidiary, Hertz Rent-A-Car, to a private equity group for $15 billion in cash and debt acquisition. The sale was completed on December 22, 2005. A 50-50 joint venture with Mahindra and AMP Mahindra of India, called Mahindra Ford India Limited, ended with Ford buying out Mahindra's remaining stake in the company in 2005. Ford had previously upped its stake to 72% in 1998. Between 2007 and 2012, Ford benefited from $1.57 billion in local tax incentives.